Okay, welcome. We are here with Kelvin Chin, also known as the man who remembers 6,000 years of past lives. Kelvin Chin. He initially learned TM, Transcendental Meditation, with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and after that he developed his own technique, and he has taught meditation to over 5,000 individuals since the 1970s. He has taught his technique to people in schools, businesses, the US military, even at West Point. And recently he released his newest book, After the Afterlife, Memories of My Past Lives.
Great to see you.
Can you tell us a little bit how this started and how you started remembering all your past lives?
Sure. Yeah, so I have about 24 or so lifetimes of memories. And again, I don't remember everything from each. I don't remember everything from this lifetime, never mind other lifetimes, past lives. But different amounts of memories from about 24 lifetimes. Some of them are historically known, but most of them are not. Most of them are, just regular people who nobody would probably know. Buddhist monks, slave, this and that. We'll get into. But the way it first started for me was I had a dream that I didn't know was anything related to a past life. So first of all, people got to understand that I did not believe in past lives. I didn't believe in reincarnation. I didn't believe in heaven when all of this stuff first started happening to me in the mid 1970s when I was in my mid 20s. So I was skeptical. So when I had the dream, I just thought it was a dream. I didn't think it had anything to do with anything other than I had a bad dream. But it was a really, really, really bad dream. It was very emotionally distressing. I was distraught, meaning really, 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 really upset in the dream. And so it left a deep impression because of that. And maybe 6 or 7 months later, I was on a meditation retreat but there were about 75 people in the hotel that I was in, and there were hundreds of people at different other hotels and so forth around Switzerland at the time. As you mentioned, that's when I was still involved with the TM organization, Transcendental Meditation, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and all that. So I was with a group of TM teachers we were doing a lot of meditation on a retreat in a hotel for 2 months, every day, all day meditating. And twice a day, what we would do is get together in one of the big rooms in the hotel, and we would do a group meditation. And we were doing some exercises where we were moving energy around. And during one of those exercises, I flipped over on my back. Now, there's just moving energy, but it involuntarily, the energy pushed my feet up in the air. And then I went down, obviously my back came down on the floor. We were sitting on foam mattresses. So it came down on this foam mattress and my feet were over my head. And so that's obviously that's something weird like that gets your attention. And I started later, maybe a day or two later, I started having visions and feeling the physical feeling of being crucified. And I had visions of being crucified upside down. So that's the first thing that happened to me. But I didn't connect the dream to that experience until I was out for a walk after lunch or something with my friend George Hammond, and we went out for a walk. Like we all did that regularly because we were meditating all day. You got to get some exercise. You're doing yoga during the day, but you got to get out and move the cardiovascular a little bit. So we would go for these long walks after lunch and dinner. And so during one of those, I started to tell him about this dream, really upsetting dream that I had had about 6 or 8 months earlier. And all I said was that. And he finished the dream. He described to me what I was wearing, where I was. I was lying in a ditch on the side of the road. He told me what my sandals looked like and the dirty brown tunic I was wearing, and that I'd been crying all night. And I said, well, how did you know that? It blew me away. And because I never viewed him as like somebody who was psychic or anything. So I said, how did you know that? And he said, well, I found you 2,000 years ago. You don't know who you are? And I said, no. That's when he told me.
I really recommend your book. You can get it in Amazon, I understand, and other bookstores also.
Yeah, Amazon and others. Yeah, online. Yeah.
Okay. So in this book, you mentioned you also have a timeline in the end, which is really interesting. The timeline of your past lives. And you also mentioned throughout the book that you actually met Jesus not 2,000 years ago when you were Peter and when George Hammond was your brother Andrew. You mentioned that you met Jesus way back. When did you meet? Let's call him the soul that later was known as Jesus.
Exactly. Yeah, because I don't know what I know his nickname. I knew what I called him as his nickname, but I don't remember his name, his actual name from 6,000 years ago. Yeah, it was in Sumeria. I was a Sumerian businessman, but the way the experience happened was I was meditating, and so that experience happened fairly recently. I put whatever the date is I put in the book because I went through and kind of figured things out, but I think it was around 2015 or 2016 or something. And I was sitting there meditating in my room, my apartment, alone, and I got this knowingness of that I knew who Jesus was in Sumeria, and I called him. My nickname for him was Asha. I called him Asha, and I don't know Sumerian. I never studied anything about Sumeria. I mean, I just know from hearing other people talk about it that it's an ancient civilization. I didn't know exactly from when. I just knew it was very, very old. So, and I never studied the language. So after I finished meditating, and after that popped in, I was like, am I just making this up? What's that? I went and I looked it up, and Asha means cosmic order in Sumerian. So it's actually a word. It actually means cosmic order, and that was my nickname for him. And so, at least that's what this knowledge or this thought that popped up, resurfaced in my memory, evidently, was telling me. So about a week or two later, over the subsequent couple of weeks, I started getting other memories, and then I saw myself standing on a veranda, a big, huge balcony, maybe on the second floor of the building. It was my house, and I was a big, huge veranda. I still picture it. It's maybe 40, 50 feet wide and about 20, 30 feet deep. A very big veranda. And I was standing there. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning because I could see the sunrise. The sun had just risen. So it was just that early morning light. And I was standing there talking to him. And we had stayed up all night talking about spiritual ideas and concepts and stuff. And the rest of my family was still asleep. So that's the memory that I have of that. It was not a lot. So I don't, some of the lifetimes I have a lot of memories of. That one I don't have a lot of, but it's one of my oldest ones.
Yeah, I think it's the oldest one you mentioned in the book. Also,
right.
Did you ever meet Jesus again?
So then I met him 2,000 years ago, right?
Okay.
When I was one of his teachers.
You also mentioned that after the Sumerian episode, you mentioned that you were also an Egyptian priest.
Several times. Several times I was an Egyptian priest. At least 3, maybe 4 times. I think I'm not exactly sure about some of these things like that, but I was definitely an Egyptian priest more than a couple of times. So 3, 4 times. And I have very explicit memories of doing certain ceremonial things and so forth, and certain people I was with, etc., in ancient Egypt. Yeah. And I've had this thing for ancient Egypt since I was a little child, since I was 5 years old, when my mom used to take me to the museum and drop me out. And this was, I tell this story in the book where my mom was a little bit avant-garde, we could say, ahead of the curve with things. One of the things was she was very independent, and she allowed me to be very independent at a very young age. And the two of us would go to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, Massachusetts, when I was 5, 6 years old for several years after that, she would just drop me off in the lobby when the museum opened, and I'd meet her back in the lobby a couple hours later. Can you imagine dropping off a 5-6-year-old kid in a huge museum and just say, "See you later. Look at your watch. Come back here when the big hand is here and the little hand is here."
Wow, yeah, people don't do that now, especially if
You
they
don't
see
do
the
that.
movie Sound of Freedom. After watching that movie, a lot of
Oh
people
yeah.
take
Oh no. I didn't
gain
do that with
conscience.
I didn't do that with my children, but my mom did it with me regularly. And of course, back then times were different, and a lot of people didn't even go to museums back then. People think, oh, museums, all these people. No, back then this was 1955, 56. People did not go to museums much at all. And so I would go to the Egyptian mummies, the Egyptian exhibit. I would go there, and I'd go to the medieval armor. Those are the two areas I would go to. Later, I realized these were precursors. These were what I call recognition memories that I was kind of resurfacing, why I felt so emotionally comfortable in those two areas of the museum.
You also mentioned a past life in Babylon, and also another one in Israel. So,
Yeah.
these two were enemies at a certain point. Well, you were part of both cultures.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I think that one of the takeaways, if you look at all, if you go 100,000 foot and you look at all of my lifetimes over 6,000 years, I've been a Christian, I've been a Buddhist, I've been a Jew, ancient Hebrew, I've been Muslim, I've been all kinds of different religions, and religions that we don't even know what we're called, and I've been black, as I was an African slave. I've been white, Caucasian. I've been Asian. I've been native, indigenous, native, Lakota. So I've been all different ethnicities and nationalities too. And I think if people actually started remembering some of their past, they'd realize that, some of these people who are who may not have such a warm feeling about certain skin colored people may have been one of them themselves in their past. So yeah, I was an ancient Hebrew, and I was a Babylonian soldier in Babylon, and I don't know what my role was as an ancient Hebrew. The ancient Hebrew lifetime resurfaced because I just started saying stuff in Hebrew that I didn't even know. I don't know Hebrew. So I've never studied Hebrew, but I started saying some things in a group meditation once. This was in 1979, I think, or something, 78, something like that. And I was with a bunch of TM teachers, and we were doing group meditations regularly every morning. And one of them came up to me, and obviously he knew Hebrew. He happened to be Jewish in this current lifetime. And he came up to me and he said, "You know what you're saying? You know what you're talking about?" I said, "No, I'm just babbling stuff." Sometimes I would just blurt stuff out in my meditation, just involuntarily. And he said, "Oh, you're talking about God. You're talking, Yahweh." I was saying Yahweh. I didn't know what Yahweh was. And then he said, "You're talking about God and all these different spiritual ancient Hebrew stuff." And I said, "Wow, okay."
That's
Yeah.
amazing. You also mentioned you were a Tibetan Buddhist, a monk in
Yeah.
Tibet, right?
Yeah. I've been a Buddhist monk at least 3 times that I have memory of. Tibet, somewhere in Southeast Asia, and another monk in China. So I've been part of and studied different forms of Buddhism, evidently, because there's many different forms of Buddhism, and very often they're, at least back then, this is many hundreds of years ago, they were regionally kind of oriented. So you kind of live in a different region and you're practicing a different form of Buddhism. So yeah.
It reminds me more or less of the book by Lobsang Rampa, The Third Eye. He remembered his past life as a Buddhist monk too, and he wrote many books about it. But I was looking for a book similar to yours, and I could not find it. I think this is the first book written by someone who remembers so many past lives. I know that Edgar Cayce remembered some of them, and I know that some of the spiritual masters or guides also remember certain past lives, but not as many as you. And I could not find a book centered on that, talking about
Mm,
so many lifetimes. So this
mm.
is like a breakthrough you're doing. Do you feel that you're doing something that no one else did before?
I did not know that. I had not researched other books on past lives, but that's interesting. I, as far as breakthrough is concerned, what I feel my book is a breakthrough really about is not as much so many past lives, but what I remember about them and what they've taught me about myself today, and the personality traits that I've noticed that have continued for 6,000 years that I remember so far, and that continued these threads, I call them, of personality traits that seem to continue and are woven through these different lifetimes. And it's not just totally subjective on my part. It's, I can read some of the biographies and what the historians have said about several of the lifetimes that I've had. Only a few, several of them, was it 4 or 5 of them out of the 25 or something that I have memories of, but 4 or 5 of them have outside corroboration based on research that other people have done that matches with my memories of that personality traits that person has had. So to me, that's the most breakthrough thing for me, is that continuity of personality through so many different lifetimes, and what those traits have taught me that have helped me in 21st century Kelvin Chin life.
There's something interesting that I noticed, and that your experience as different people who follow different religions has given you like an overall view of what is the spiritual search and meditation. I noticed that you mentioned that meditation has been practiced not only by Hindus, but also by different cultures. Can you talk about that? And also, you once mentioned that Jesus used to meditate too. Can you
Yes,
expand on that,
sure.
please?
Yeah, sure. So, so since my lifetimes really span almost all the continents, I don't have a recollection of having a lifetime in South America, but I've pretty much been on all the other continents. Um, and I have experienced, whether we call it meditation or meditative type practices, on all those different continents. Now, most people think of meditation coming out of India, and I think that's primarily because so many Indian gurus came out, starting with, well, Yogananda back in the 1920s and 30s, but then Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in the 50s, 1959, and a lot of others, in the 1950s and 60s and 1970s, came from India. So I think today a lot of people associate meditation primarily with India, but meditation has been worldwide for as long as we've been around, whether you called it a form of meditation or not, including when we were with Jesus. Jesus taught us to meditate. We didn't call it meditation. We called it seeking the kingdom of heaven. Well, he called it seeking the kingdom of heaven within. So then we started calling it seeking the kingdom of heaven within, as a form of prayer. Prayer, not asking for stuff, but prayer in terms of connection with oneself in this different way that today in 21st century Earth, we happen to label and call meditation. But it's the same idea of connecting with oneself. So when Jesus said, seek the kingdom of heaven within, that's what he was talking about, is to connect with oneself. And that's the phrase that he used to when he was teaching us how to connect within ourselves, which I now view, in retrospect, looking back, as him teaching us to meditate. He already knew how to do this. He didn't have to go anywhere. There's this notion, there's this myth out there that he somehow went to India to learn. He was a very bright, evolved being, and still is. It kind of baffles me when people think of him as so bright and evolved, and some people even worship him and view him as, the son of God, and however they label him, and yet they still think that he had to leave to go someplace to learn how to meditate, connect within himself. What does evolved mean if you cannot connect with yourself when you're closing your eyes, right? So anyway, no, he already knew. He came in to this world as Jesus, that incarnation anyway, already knowing how to connect within himself in a very, very deep, very natural way, right?
In the book, you also mentioned, you talk a lot about Richard the Lionheart, and you mentioned that he was a pretty tall guy, pretty strong, and that back then combats were mainly man to man. They were physical combats where you actually had a sword and you had to punch people, and survive. So you also say that he did not enjoy killing people, but that he did. So can you talk about that?
So one of the personality traits that runs through all of my lifetimes is that I'm a very practical person, very pragmatic, practical, get the job done. What's the job? Do we need to do it? Do we need to change it? Or are we forced to do this in this way? Then let's do it, and let's do it as practically and as completely and as effectively as possible. So that's part of one of my personality traits. All of those different adjectives kind of describe who I still am today and who I was 6,000 years ago and everything in between, including what you're talking about 1,000 years ago in the 1100s when I was leading the Third Crusades. So, yeah, I was big, 6'5", 230 pounds. I did not know anything about Richard the Lionheart before I started having memories of being on battlefields. And it was probably about 10 or 15 years later, after those battlefield memories, and seeing myself in chainmail with a tunic with a cross on it. So I knew I was a crusader. But it was probably 10 or 15 years later that I had this knowingness that I was 6'5" tall, 230 pounds. So I was a big guy. And I don't know where that came from. Obviously, now I know it came from, but it came from my memory. But it just popped into my consciousness, that knowingness of how big I was. I didn't figure out for another 15 or 20 years later who exactly I was. But I saw that I had red hair in 1978 when I first had that vision of myself with the chainmail in the castle and so forth. Took me a while to connect all these dots, because it turns out there was only one person who was 6'5" in the Crusades, who had red hair and who was always at the what's called the phalanx. I was always at the beginning, at the tip of the thousands of troops. I always led
the front
my troops
line.
in the front line. I was always right at the tip of the spear, they call it, on horseback, leading my troops in. And it's interestingly, I never got killed. I got wounded many, many times, but I never got killed. I was huge, on horseback on a 1,400-pound war horse. We had two horses. The knights had two horses. We had an 800 or a 900-pound horse to ride on regularly. And then on battle, we had a 1,400-pound war horse as well. Why? Because, I probably weighed around 300 or more pounds on horseback with all my armor and my helmet and the sword and everything. So leading battles like that, I was a huge person, and I'm fighting men who were probably 5'5", 5'2", 5'6", 120, 130 pounds, half my weight, and tiny, because everything is small. My arms were about the size of their legs, so it was part of what I had to do. Now, why did I do it? it's interesting why I did it. I didn't, as you said, enjoy killing people. I felt that it was my duty to God and country, and mainly God, maybe Christianity at the time, because I was still a believer in the Pope at the time. So I've come in and out of this Christianity thing, and now you know where I'm at now. I'm not into it, although I went to a Christian church when I was a kid this lifetime, but never really bought all the stuff, because now I know the history of Christianity is really based out of Paul, not Jesus, now that I've had all my Jesus memories. But when I was Richard, I was steeped in it. And so I followed what the Pope said. And the Pope said that we all needed to go to the Middle East, to the Holy Land, and take back Jerusalem. So when I first went there, I was all in. But as I describe in my book, after we were there for a few years, or about 2 years I was there, and then I X'd out. I created a peace treaty with Saladin, the leader of the Saracens. And Saracens, by the way, is the term for Muslims in the 1100s. Muslims is a new term as of the 1600s. But I negotiated a peace treaty with him, and I left. We left the Middle East because I saw what the Pope was doing. He was doing it for political reasons. This whole crusade thing was done by him and other popes for very political reasons. So we'll just leave it at that. And I saw through that. I talked a little bit about that in the book. And I said, no, I'm not going to be part of that anymore.
That was not the only life you had being a soldier, let's call it. You were also a Japanese samurai. That's interesting. So did you also kill people back then?
Yeah, yes and no. So when I was a Japanese samurai, I had more of an administrative role as a samurai, but I was trained to fight, yes. So a lot of people don't realize that this is how I triangulated. So I use this phrase. This is how I figure out like approximately what time period that this particular lifetime happened. So sometimes I'll see things like in my slave experience when I was a Carthaginian slave. I saw warships and I saw what they looked like, and they were ramming. So I knew that it was ancient. It wasn't like recent history. It wasn't even 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago. It was really old. So I look at things. So in the samurai experience, I knew that I had more of an administrative role, although I was trained to fight as a samurai. And so what I later learned by kind of following the breadcrumbs and connecting the dots and so forth, is that early on in the, let's say, 12, 13, 1400s, samurais were all in each other's face, basically, in Japan, fighting each other for territory. And it was, for several hundred years, it was all about fighting. But I don't remember that. That's not my memory. My explicit memory was not that, and that I was more of an administrative leader as a samurai. Again, I don't know where I was in the food chain, how high up it was, but I was a administrator. All samurai were of the higher class in Japan, if people don't know that. But I wasn't like the head guy. But when did that happen? That happened later in the samurai periods. So that's how I connected those dots. So it's probably late 1600s I was a samurai, something around there, before I was Frederick II. So Frederick II was born, I think, around 1721 or something. So I died somewhere before 1721, probably in that latter period of samurais, when they became more administrative, and there was less fighting going on. There was more politicking going on and less fighting. Earlier on, it was just fighting, and getting territory.
Another warrior you mentioned is Sitting Bull. So that's an interesting lifetime too, because you were a Native American.
Yeah. And I really I really was found killing distasteful that lifetime in particular, but necessary at times. So it was my view of this has evolved over time. I've never enjoyed killing. That's a personality trait, but I have engaged in it a lot more in previous lifetimes than in my later lifetimes. So Sitting Bull is known as a shaman as well as a Lakota chief, and he's known as a negotiator and so forth, and a protector of women and children. Those are a few of the key personality traits that I've talked about in the book. But when the blue coats, what we call the blue coats, the U.S. government troops are attacking us and taking away our lands, then we needed to defend ourselves. So, killing for killing's sake, I never engaged in. In fact, I told before the Battle of Little Bighorn, when Custer was annihilated and killed himself, when his whole troops were annihilated, I told the Braves to not scalp anybody, because I knew that it would piss off the U.S. government even more just from us defending ourselves. And if we won the battle, and I had a dream before that, which a prescient dream, which foretold that we would win. That's how I interpreted it, and I was right. But I told them not to, and they didn't listen to me. You can't control everybody. Free will, right? But my view of killing was always as a necessity, especially that lifetime, only by necessity. And we never killed. It's historically known and documented that Sitting Bull never killed any women and children, unlike many of the other natives.
Right. And unlike the white man who did kill women and children.
Exactly.
So what about this World War II fighter pilot? You were also there killing people?
Yeah, killing people, defending the country, and I knew that something was going to go down. And I had.
Were you American?
I was American.
Okay.
Yeah, I was American. I was tall, blonde, blue eyes. Lived in San Diego. Well, part of my lifetime when I trained, I lived in San Diego, U.S. Navy pilot, and so forth. I got married and then shipped out like almost immediately after I got married.
This was more recent. This was like a recent lifetime. Did you ever manage to prove anything of what you experienced or find out who this guy was?
I looked and I tried to figure it out, and I couldn't exactly. I looked up different people. I'm pretty sure I was on Guadalcanal. I think I may have. I was protecting Guadalcanal after having flown off the USS Enterprise in one of the battles where prior battles where two of the three elevators on the aircraft carrier had been dive bombed by the Japanese, and so only a few of the planes could land back on the Enterprise, and the rest of us landed on Guadalcanal. And I think I hung out there for a while, helping defend Henderson Field. So, because interestingly, in that lifetime, I had this memory of being a World War II fighter pilot in the South Pacific starting in 1978 or so. But I also, in the 1980s, started having a memory of being in World War II in the jungle, and crawling around and hearing gunfire by the Japanese who were trying to kill us. And I remember these little tents that we had, and I was trying to hide, and all I had was a sidearm, pistol, and I was scared. I thought I was going to get killed. And I thought those two things didn't go together, other than maybe I got shot down or something like that, and I ended up in the jungle. But being an aircraft carrier, being a carrier pilot, and living for a while in the jungle didn't seem to make sense to me. And I was doubting whether or not that memory was accurate until I later was watching a documentary a few years ago. This is fairly recent, where I saw the documentary where they talked about the Enterprise, 2 of the 3 elevators got blown up, and then a lot of the pilots could not land back on that carrier. Some of them went to another carrier, but then some of them had to land before you run out of fuel, obviously. Instead of ditching in the ocean, you want to obviously save your life, save the plane. So a lot of us landed back at Guadalcanal. I think that's what happened to me. And because I remember having memories of taking off from an island aircraft field with the canopy wide open because it was so hot and humid, like you can't imagine. I don't know, 110 degrees with 100% humidity. I mean, just ridiculous. And I remember taking off from a jungle island aircraft field with the canopy wide open because you're so hot that you want the cool air blowing on. Well, first it's hot air blowing on you as you're taking off from the ground, and as you get up higher and higher elevation, the air cools down. And I just remember I have this visceral memory of how heavenly physically the feeling of the cold air is after being, swelteringly hot down on the jungle island. So that's when I connected the dots in that memory, that lifetime.
Okay, now I have a question, a philosophical question.
Sure.
How can you explain that Peter the Apostle, who played an important role in spirituality and religion, in his later lifetimes, killed people and was a warrior? And do you believe in karma? Do you think that you accumulated karma, or how does that play?
No.
What are your views on karma and all
So
that?
there's a couple of different questions in there. So I'll answer the karma one first, and I'll come back to why you think I had why I may have done these different things in different lifetimes. Karma means action in Sanskrit. That's the literal translation of the word karma. It just means action. Now, we have used it to mean consequences to one's action. And do I believe that there are consequences to our actions? Absolutely, yes. I think it's pretty self-evident that we do have consequences to our actions. I mean, just look, observe your life. Everybody either observe their own life. Yes, there are consequences to our actions. But the notion that some of the schools out of the Vedic tradition believe that not just that there are consequences to one's actions, but those consequences, those actions, if you do bad stuff, it builds up mountains of karma. And if you do good stuff, you get positive credits against your negative bad actions that you've done. That's a made up thing by humans. That's been made up. And so some of your viewers may know or may have seen some of my videos on my YouTube channel and whatever, where I talk about the 30th November talk, which I organized. Now, I know you have seen the 30th November talk, and you've heard those people, those spiritual beings who created the whole notion of karma, that say that they created the whole notion of karma to promote this idea that there are consequences to one's actions and one should pay attention. But that they didn't create this later notion that thousands of years later, so they created this notion of karma, for those people who don't know, around 10,000 years ago. And they try to help humanity move forward and, pay attention to what you're doing. There are consequences. But thousands of years later, other people, other beings, other people started making this a religious thing, karma, and saying that there's this mountain of karma that you have to get rid of, and there's this cosmic accounting system in the universe. That was all made up by other human beings, made that up to try to control people. And so it became part of religious scripture and all this stuff. That's thousands of years old, but it's not 10,000 years old. It's not 8 or 7,000 years old. It's more recent. It's old, but it's more recent. So I don't believe that, because there is no cosmic accounting systems that are going on some energetic, magical thing, because we all have free will. So this comes back to your question of why I did these different things, because I have the free will to do whatever. Nothing karmically is controlling me. There's no cosmic accounting system that is some inanimate thing, in other words, that's pulling my puppet strings, making me do certain things because I was a bad person or I was a good person. There's no puppet strings being pulled by anything or anybody. There's nobody, there's no God, there's no group of gods who are pulling your puppet strings, making you do anything or making me do anything. We all have free will, which means you can make any choice you want. And if God, him or herself, tells you to do something, you can choose not to do it. And I've chosen not to do stuff that Jehovah has said as well. Jehovah, many people view as God. I don't view Jehovah as God, and neither does Jehovah view himself as God. But some people do view him as capital G God, controlling thing. That's all right. But you can disagree with anybody, any mind, whether you call that person or that mind God, or whether you call him your dry cleaner down the street. It doesn't matter. We each have control over our minds. So I chose to do different things in my lifetimes. And why did I choose to come back as a leader of countries? Sometimes, not all the time. It's just a handful of times you're talking about, 3, 4 times. Why did I choose to do that? I chose to do that because I thought I could make a difference in people's lives. That's what I thought. And this lifetime, I've made different choices because I've learned from that even as a benevolent king of countries, maybe I could do some good work to help people live a better life, etc. And yes, sometimes it involved fighting and defending our borders. Sometimes it involved expanding our borders as well to create more prosperity for the nation that I may have been leading at the time. But my goal always was to do it in a way that helped promote my people. Now, I have a different view now. So people wonder, do you evolve over these lifetimes? I hope so. Do you learn lessons? I hope so. I hope I have, because I don't view myself as a leader of nation anymore. I view myself as a world citizen. Now that I have all these memories, but even before I had all these memories, since this lifetime, since birth, I have viewed myself as a world citizen. Now I understand I look like I'm Chinese. Now people don't know that I used to have long, black, straight hair. And I really looked Chinese when I was growing up. So that I get some racial slurs and so forth growing up? Yeah, sometimes I did in the white middle class, a very Irish Italian Catholic small town outside of Boston that I grew up in. Did I feel odd about that, aside from getting my feelings hurt, which they did, obviously? But did I feel odd? Yeah, I felt odd because I'm like, who are they talking to? Oh, that's right, I'm Chinese. Because I felt like I'm a world citizen. I've always felt like that, even from as a child. So I hope that is some sort of illustration of how I've matured over the thousands of years. So and I've chosen to work in the battlefields of business this lifetime, and not on the battlefields killing people. I'm a pacifist now. Now, would I defend my loved ones or my family if they were, subjected to potential harm? Absolutely.
Yeah, that's more or less the view that Krishna had when he talked to Arjuna before this great battle where he was about to fight against his own people. His family was divided, so he was going to fight against his cousins and his uncles. And
exactly.
he asked Krishna, what should I do? Should I kill them or not? And Krishna said, look, we all die and are reborn. This lifetime is only one among many. So do your duty, defend your family, defend your nation. That's basically what he told him. So
Right.
I guess that when you're following a duty, you can do those things without accumulating karma, as people know, and as you just said, that it doesn't even exist. But
Yeah.
so, what is your main lesson after all these lifetimes?
Yeah.
What do you? What is your advice for people nowadays? And do you think that humanity is going somewhere better, or are we heading to something terrible?
I'll say the last thing first, your last part of your question. I think humanity is much better off than it used to be. Are we in a downturn right now where things are at risk? Yes. So both things can be true. Both things can be true. People forget. A lot of people just don't know history, and I suggest that people look at history and study history a little bit, because if you don't, you just end up making the same stupid mistakes over and over and over again because you're not learning anything. And this is a problem with governments and leaders throughout the world, not just in our country here in the United States or where you are in South America. I mean, it doesn't matter what continent we're on. We're human beings, and humans, some people choose to learn and some people don't. And I encourage people to learn. To your first part of your question, is that's what I encourage people to do. That's the major takeaway, is that I have tried to learn for these 6,000 years that I'm aware of so far, through all of these experiences that I've had, and that I don't claim to be perfect. I don't think anybody is. That said, I hope that I have continued to try to move the needle in a more positive direction. And so what does that mean? For me, when I assess myself, I look at, have I been giving more than taking? Is it more positive than negative? And if I've been more positive than negative, then I've been moving in a more positive direction. And obviously you want to move a lot more positively if possible. But looking at our past and learning from it is important. And I think the takeaway from my book is look at one's emotional patterns. You don't have to remember your past lives, but look at your emotional patterns, and you'll see throughout my book, that's the thread. You look at my emotional patterns. Yes, I have memories, but there are emotional patterns that go alongside, that walk alongside my memories. Those are the things that we all can access much more readily, and we can learn more about who we are and learn from that and stop making the same mistakes again and move forward more in a positive direction, both individually and as a humanity as well. So people can contact me. They just Google my name, Kelvin Chin. Just make sure you get the L in there, Kelvin, Chin. Probably the easiest is to Google my name, or you can go to my one of my 4 websites, which is kelvinchin.org. So just my name.org, because as you mentioned in your introduction, I do everything through my nonprofits now. And so that's probably the easiest way to reach me. And I do a free 1-hour consultation with anybody about anything all the classes that I teach, afterlife classes, meditation, overcoming the fear of death, any of this stuff, past life stuff, and so forth. People can do a free 1-hour phone session with me anywhere in the world. I have students in 64 countries now. I just got my first Norwegian student the other day. So 64 countries. People just reach out to me, a free session about anything that they want to talk to me about. Just go to my website, send me an email. So meditation, the way I teach it is very, very easy. No concentration, no controlling the mind, no clearing the mind of thoughts. So right there, anybody who's tried any other form of meditation probably goes, well, wait a minute, that sounds different from what they were taught. Yeah, exactly. It's different. It can be very, very easy, and it should be easy. And so, as you said in your introduction, I learned TM first. I studied personally with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in 1971 and 1973. I became an international leader in his organization for about 10 years. They went off in a different direction, gotten into all kinds of other stuff, and I stayed focused on meditation, and I left the organization. I call what I teach now turning within meditations. I call it turning within. I don't teach TM anymore. I've removed all the cultural trappings, so it does not look anything Indian. It doesn't look Hindu like TM, does. So again, nothing bad to say about what they're teaching, but I wanted to make mine more receptive and accessible to anybody in the world, regardless of religion or culture. And I've made it much easier. So 10 to 15 minutes each time, twice a day, that's all that you got to do. It's very, very easy. People could just contact me, and or they can go to my website, go to my meditation website, and which they'll find on Google, and then learn more about it there. Yeah. Also,
Well, I highly recommend your book. Those people who are interested can get it in Amazon like I did. So this was really great. I'm really grateful that we had this talk, and I would like to interview you soon and talk about other things like your 30 November talks, and also about everything you have experienced with George Hammond, who has played a key role in your life. And you also have a lot of experiences with Jesus, Maharishi, Jehovah, and all of them who are still in contact with George and with all of you, right?
Yes, is still in contact with George and me and many others as well. But yes.